Good evening. Thank you for tuning in to Face to Face. I'm your host, Dennis Ward. Our guest this week is, simply put, a legend. Tom Jackson is an actor, musician, producer, and activist whose career has spanned 4 decades. Many of our viewers can still tune in each and every day to see Mr. Jackson in his iconic role as Peter Kennedy on North of 60. But it is music that is his first love, and the annual Huron Carol has become very well known. Tom is out in support of the series right now, and it's a real pleasure to be able to welcome you here, Tom, to the show this week.
Well, I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks so much.
The annual Christmas or Huron Carol Christmas series is now 3 decades old and still going strong. Where did the idea first come from?
It was out of a need that I became aware of in Toronto for an organization called Council Fire. I was a volunteer at the organization, and I asked what I might be able to do, what their need was. Mm-hmm. And the year previous to that, they had a shortage, and this is right down in Parliament and Gerrard, which is a challenged area in Toronto, and they had a shortage of 500 hampers that previous year, and this was in the early days of food banks. Mm-hmm. So I called a number of friends of mine and said maybe we could raise some money for Council Fire and help them out with their food. So we did. It wasn't as successful as we thought, at least not in an obvious way. We went to a place called the Silver Dollar, which had been closed down, and they reopened it. The city allowed us to go in there for one night, so we took toothbrushes and scrubbed it up and polished it up, and it was a kind of a black tie event. And we didn't raise enough money for the food, but people like yourself and media picked up on the need itself. Mm-hmm. And the next day, when we went back to Council Fire, I never actually walked through the door. There were lineups for as far as you could see with cars and trucks delivering food to Council Fire. So what that told me, eventually anyway, and it didn't happen until I came back here to Winnipeg 2 years later, but what it told me, there was an effective way to get food in motion, and that was money. Mm-hmm. Right? It wasn't always food. Right? Although that would contradict my statement, but we were here in Winnipeg a couple of years later. Harvest was in need of some financial assistance because of the building that they were in. They didn't have money to pay for rent. This is a true story. Mm-hmm. And remembering back to the earlier experience a couple of years earlier, decided to try and organize the community here, and we managed to raise enough money for a couple or 3 or 4 months rent. And now Harvest is an example for the country, if not the nation.
The annual Carol raises money for local food banks and family services. In the 30-plus years, any idea, Tom, how much you've been able to help out with this?
Well over $200 million in cash and food services.
Wow.
Well over that, yeah.
What's that say to you?
Well, there's an ongoing need, but one of the things that I've discovered was there's always a gap between the haves and the have-nots. Over 30 years, that hasn't changed. There's always a big gap, and the need is greater. Our people are living longer, and the economy goes up and down, and when it goes up and down, a lot of people who are in need, a lot of people who are hungry, children in particular, get caught in the wake. Mm-hmm. So just have to acknowledge that it is. A lot of people have asked me, well, have things changed, and how do you see your role in the future? And I said, well, it hasn't really changed, and that's not really my responsibility. I'm a Band-Aid. Right? And I accept the fact that I'm a Band-Aid. The greater problems that have to be solved have to be left to others. But for years, there's a larger responsibility that was overlooked by local, provincial, or national governments, federal governments, in the area of food banks. I don't know if that's changed much, but the need is still there.
Did you ever think 30 years later you'd still be out on the road with the show?
No, and I never thought that it would be a national tour. I never thought that it would be a national television series. It was we did a special every Christmas for 10 years, a national show, and I never thought that either. And we've downsized and changed things from time to time, but the need was calling again. I know that it's redundant to say the need all the time, but it is something that we all have to pay attention to.
You've dedicated so much of your career and time to numerous causes. Some people may not know, but you did spend time on the streets of Winnipeg here. How has that influenced the work that you've done?
Well, let me just say that my time here on the streets of Winnipeg was glorious. Like, I wouldn't have traded that for the world. I was a young man, and call it 15 to 21, 22. The bonding, the love, the understanding of what it means to be a part of a community, was very strong. And I cherish those memories. So that maybe have some influence on my work, but prior to the event 32 years ago in downtown Toronto, this is the famous story, is that I basically dug a hole for myself when I was 38 years old. I was addicted to drugs. I was living in a hole in the ground. And this is my story, that the Creator came to me one night when I was crazy between Christmas and New Year's and said, "I'll make you a deal." He said, "I'm going to send you an angel, and that angel is going to be worse off than you. And if you help that angel, I'm going to help you." And I took the deal. And that brought me here to you.
Well, and we're glad it did. And, when you mentioned these times and hard times for yourself that you went through, did you ever imagine at any point that you would go on to have the career that you have?
No, but there was a point in time in that transition when working my way out of those problems that I realized that I could survive if I could help others. I needed two things. One was to find organizations that could help others, that I could fall in line with, or I could use what I knew, what little I knew, to become more credible. I believed that I had to have some legitimacy in order to create change, and where that, and I don't want to sound holier than thou. Really be careful. I don't want to go down that road of sounding holier than thou, but here it is. I decided that I had to become a better actor if I was going to do anything, and arguably I achieved some of that in my later years, I think. But also as a musician, I had to become a better musician because I wasn't playing for myself. I was playing for somebody else. I was acting for somebody else, just in order to get some credibility, in order to walk into somebody's door and say, "Listen, we have a problem. We have a problem, and I need your help to help them." Right. And I found myself supporting organizations that were very efficient at what they did, and that the entertainment industry could become fuel for that vehicle. Now, a really interesting part of my life is I'm involved with an organization called the DOPE Team in Calgary, which is a crisis rescue vehicle, basically, transport vehicle. Yeah. DOPE stands for Downtown Outreach Addictions Partnership. And so now my world is full circle, and I'm the happiest man on the planet. You couldn't find somebody happier than me. There might be people as happy as me, but nobody happier.
Right.
And that's because the full circle part is that I can now engage. I now have the skill to engage with people who are in trouble, people who are on the street, people who are living in holes in the ground, people who are addicted, people who are abused. All of those people, I can promise you that I can help you. Why? Because it's not, again, it's not me, but it's the organization or the organizations that I'm surrounded with that, in fact, have the skill. But I can go and actually pull people out of situations, and do. And not just me, I have a team. It's not my team, I'm part of a team.
Right.
Right? And it's really very different and rewarding to do that than it is, although I continue to support organizations that do hands-on work with homeless people. I'm now engaged on the front. And I never thought that I had that skill or the courage. And I realize it doesn't take courage, and it doesn't really take a lot of skill. It does take commitment and compassion, but we all have that. We just have to look for it, right?
Right. The Huron Carol this year has a new stop, one that you haven't done in the past, and that's Humboldt. And maybe, Tom, if you can tell us a little why that's a date that's been added here this year.
But briefly, I work again with another organization which we all know of, which is the Red Cross. And I'm an ambassador for the Red Cross. And in some ways, it's the same kind of work that I do with the DOPE team and others, in that the Creator gave me a particular skill, and that's kind of being able to spot people who are in trouble, right? People, you can just see it. Mm-hmm. And it's easy to just go over and, just calm somebody down, give some warmth, and give that transfer of that somewhere deep in your soul and your core to somebody else, and then make them feel a little more comfortable. And there may be a little Tom Jackson factor involved in that, and with the North of 60 and the familiarity, but that comes from the legitimacy that I was talking about, right?
Right.
And I was there in Humboldt for the vigil shortly after the terrible accident. And I got to know the community a little bit that night. I got to know the mayor and contacted the mayor. And when we had an open date, it just so happened that they were able to take this on in their community. So we'll be in Humboldt. It's a sold-out show, and bring some people joy, right? We know compassion, we know love, but we don't always know joy.
Right.
So we're traveling with a joy. Joy to the world.
Tom, we've got to just take a quick break for a commercial here, and then we'll be right back to Face to Face to continue our conversation with Tom Jackson. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Tom Jackson, an actor, musician, producer, and activist whose career has spanned 4 decades. Of course, we mentioned at the top of the show that Tom's role as Chief Peter Kennedy on North of 60 is forever ingrained in all of our minds. Tom, there's been a real resurgence of reboots of shows recently. Is North of 60, has there been any talk of bringing that show back?
Well, I'm not the guy to make those calls, but I had a conversation with Tom Cox, and there's something in the wind out there. We're not sure. I'm not sure where that's at. I'm going to make the phone call, and maybe you should.
Yeah, I would.
Just for the heck, right?
Yeah.
Maybe I'll have somebody. But there was a conversation that I had with Tom about the possibility of developing, not my developing, but they were developing himself, and I think he was working with Tina, and Tina was working with Barb Samuels, who was one of the original producers of this. Mm-hmm. And the possibility of maybe we'll do 6 episodes and see what happens.
You got me very excited right now. What does the show represent to you?
As I recall, it's been 1997. since we shot a frame of the series. Now, there were movies of the week after that, but the series, 1997. You think back to that, go back 5 years from there, 1992, and what the world was like then. I mean, it's not that long ago, but it would be for you, right?
Yeah.
It might be for you. So when you think back, the window into the life of First Nation communities or First Nation people was different back then. It was pretty much closed. And it took a long time, I think, for the series to actually catch on, other than in the North or in First Nation communities. Very important to First Nation communities. But it took a while for the rest of the country to pick up on it. But when they did, they started to realize that there's not that much difference between us. I mean, people always talked about they or others, but we're not really others, are we? And that became part of the framework of the new view into First Nation life.
You talk about how it was some time ago and how things were different, but I've just watched every episode again, PVR'd them once it came on to APTN recently, and you know, there are a lot of the same issues, resource development and housing, and all these things are still issues today.
They are, and they will be for quite some time. I think that we've got a long way to go to tackle and improve the willingness to tackle it and improve the issues that exist currently. Although I'm happy to say that it may not be visible that it's moving, but it's moving. You know, that people are becoming more aware, more active. I feel like we're in a resurgence of activity. It's like bell bottoms.
Yeah.
Bell bottoms are coming back. I'm seeing that energy come back. There was a period of time where there was a lot of energy around activism, and young people were getting frustrated, but now realizing that you can create change. You can have a voice, and you can stand up, and you can be heard. And when you do it, when you're courageous and you do stand up, and if you stand up, you know, you don't have to always wave a militant flag, you know, a radical flag maybe, but not necessarily a militant flag. I mean, some places I guess that makes sense, but it doesn't make sense to me in this country. It makes sense, you know, maybe to others in other parts of the world, but I myself don't get that either. But nevertheless, right now, there is an awareness, and there is a sensitivity, and there is, you know, truth and reconciliation it's on people's minds. Some people don't know what that means. To me, my great epiphany was being in the detox center. Truth is today, right? Truth is today and yesterday and the day before. But reconciliation is today and go forward, right? So when I was in the detox, I'll tell you this little story. There was a guy by the name of Greg, and he was talking to my colleague Adam, and he was going on about how tough it was, and he was 60 years old, and he'd go to the temp and try and get a job, and the jobs would all go to the young people, and he'd end up in the bar and then end up on the mat. Well, I don't know how he made money to go to the bar or end up on the, I have no idea about that, but he was going on, and he went on for 10 minutes with Adam about this. And then he looked at me and he said, "Are you Tom Jackson?" Because there were only the three of us in the room. And I said, "Yeah." And so he started going on with me about it. And I went, "Hey, Greg, hold on a minute. Well, I have a friend," and I told him a quick story about my friend Don Simpson. Don is 80 years old. He's now 85, but at 80, his doctor said, "You're going to live to be 105. 105, he said, "I got to make a plan. That's not right. Don't tell me that." Yeah. So I went to my doctor, and I had the same kind of question to my doctor, and my doctor went, no way. Not going to happen." So we negotiated, collaborated, negotiated, came up with 90. Okay, so I got 20 years to go. And I said this to Greg. I said, so don't spend 10 minutes telling me about this problem I just heard about. I said, I'll tell you what, though. If you want to talk to me about making a plan, right? If you want to talk to me about making a plan, let's do that. And I said, what do you want to do? And he said, well, I was a great forklift operator. I said, can you still do that? And he said, yeah. So we put it into a mix. The next day, he got an offer because somebody heard about him being in the detox. Right. That was one of the elements that got him the job. Somebody actually cared, right? But it was the exposure of his position and his history. That's the truth. Okay, now what are we going to do? Let's do something. Let's make a plan. Let's move forward. Right. That's reconciliation, right? So I better understood what truth and reconciliation is in a very simple form. You know, and as long as we are willing to acknowledge history and make history, then we'll go forward. And we have to collaborate. Don Simpson told me, he said, if we go into a room negotiating, we're not going to get as far as if we go into a room collaborating. If we agree to go into the room as collaborators, then when we come out of that room, we're not going to be perfect. Let's acknowledge that. But we are going to be better. Okay? So we're going to be better. Think of this. What if you went into the room twice? What if you went into the room 3 times? Better, better, better. And that's what we have to strive for. They don't have to be huge steps. Just little steps is good.
Tom, I'm going to have to hold you there. We do have to step aside for one more quick break, and then we'll be right back to continue the conversation with Tom Jackson. Welcome back to Face to Face. Our guest this week is Tom Jackson. And Tom, I grew up with you on Shining Time Station and then on North of 60, long-running shows that some can still watch now. But you've never slowed down, whether it was Star Trek or Law and Order or any of these. You got a big Hollywood movie coming out next year. Are you actively seeking out these roles still, or are people knocking on your door?
I used to hope that I would have a stack of scripts that people had submitted to me, but that didn't happen. Yeah. But recently, I've been fortunate enough for people to seek me out. So I'm not saying that I don't do anything in between those roles, because I get to do a lot of things. Music is one of the big things. We have a new single out, so this will be big for me. If you go and find Soul Angel, it's a single, it's a Christmas song, and if you believe in Christmas and you believe these stories I've just been telling you, go and listen to that song.
Well, and we'll encourage everyone to. We'll also encourage everyone to get in touch about that North of 60 reboot, even 6 episodes. I'd take a movie of the week even myself. But Tom, it's been a real pleasure to have you here on the show. I really appreciate you doing this for us. Thank you.
Very nice to talk to you, Dennis.
That is all the time we do have for this week. We're always looking for new guests, so if you have any suggestions, please email us at news@aptn.ca. And of course, this show will be available as a podcast at aptn.ca/face-to-face podcast. Thanks so much for tuning in to Face to Face. I'm Dennis Ward.